So uh, I understand framework too. I mean, intellectually, I get it. I drop my little mental pebbles into the pond. I set my intentions, and I trust the process.
Great. You trust that the ripples are out there organizing things.
Yeah, exactly. But Seth says framework two can be perceived directly through the inner senses, like not just believed as some abstract concept and actually experienced. And I'm stuck on that. How do we open our perception to actually sense that creative matrix behind physical reality?
Well, the material is incredibly uncompromising on this point. I mean, pulling straight from the core texts, Seth says, Framework 2 can be perceived directly through the inner senses. It's not a theory, it is a direct experience.
And that right there is exactly why we're doing this deep dive. Because if you're listening to this, you probably hit the exact same wall that I have.
Yeah, that gap between knowing the map and actually walking the terrain.
Right? I know the terminology. Framework one is the physical world, the stage. Framework two is the backstage, the psychological blueprint where events are formed. But I don't want to just read the menu anymore. I want to taste the food.
I love that. And diagnosing that gap between knowing and feeling, it really begins with fundamentally redefining our equipment.
Redefining our equipment, like our senses.
Yeah, exactly. We are entirely accustomed to relying on our physical senses, sight, sound, touch, and we trust them completely. But Seth explains, quite radically I might add, that these physical senses deal exclusively with camouflage patterns. They are actually limiting devices.
Wait, limiting devices?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, most people think of their eyes and ears as windows to the universe, not limiters.
I know, it's total paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Think of your physical senses as highly specialized filters. They are purposefully designed to block out the vast multidimensionality of the universe.
So we aren't overwhelmed.
Exactly. They force your focus onto a highly specific 3D physical reality so you can just survive and manipulate objects. Like if you saw the vibrating, energetic reality of a speeding bus, you might be too mesmerized to step out of the way.
Right, you just stand there admiring its multidimensional beauty while it runs you over.
Yeah, exactly. So your physical eyes give you a solid, threatening metal box. That's the camouflage. It's necessary. But just as your outer senses perceive that physical camouflage, you have this completely natural, inherent capacity, your inner senses.
And those aren't metaphors, right?
No, not at all. They are actual perceptual mechanisms. They deliver data from the inner world of reality directly to your mind.
Let me make sure I'm locking onto this. It makes me think of the instrument panel in an airplane.
Okay, yeah.
Like the gauges and dials, the altitude, the airspeed, that's framework one. That's the camouflage. It's a highly compressed symbolic representation of reality that lets the pilot fly the plane safely.
Right, it's useful, but it's not the actual environment.
Exactly. If you just stare at the gauge, you see a needle pointing to a number. But the gauge isn't the sky. The gauge isn't the wind or the temperature. To sense that, you have to look up from the panel and actually look out the window.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. The inner senses read the actual environment, not the symbolic dashboard.
So if I'm looking out that window into framework two, what exactly am I looking at?
Well, this brings us to a core concept, detailed really deeply in the unknown reality. It's the aliveness behind physical form. When you use your inner senses, you're perceiving what Seth calls consciousness units, or CUs.
Okay, we need to slow down here and unpack CUs, because it can sound like mystical jargon. I mean, I used to think of them like invisible pixels of reality.
Yeah, a lot of people do.
But that's still treating them like physical objects, right? Like tiny Legos.
Yeah.
How do CUs actually work?
You're right to toss out the pixel analogy because pixels are static. They're fixed. Consciousness units are anything but fixed. You have to think of them not as physical building blocks, but as pure, intensely aware information packets.
Aware information.
Yes, they are highly adaptable particles of awareized energy. They literally form the systems of reality, and they aren't bound by time or space. They exist in every place and time simultaneously.
So wait, how do they become a tree or a rock or a chair? Like, what's the mechanism of action there?
It comes down to focus and intent. CUs possess this profound, inborn propensity for organization. They are the clay of the universe, but they're alive, conscious clay.
Wow. Conscious clay.
Yeah. So when a particular consciousness, whether it's your consciousness or the consciousness of the earth, focuses its intent, these CUs collapse from infinite possibilities into specific forms.
They take on the camouflage.
Exactly. They become the specific physical temperature, the texture, the color of the leaf you're looking at. So when you attempt to sense framework 2, you're trying to sense the vital humming activity of these units before they solidify into framework 1.
That is staggering. I mean, it implies that nothing is truly solid. Everything is just a swirling mass of aware energy, just, holding a temporary pose because something is looking at it.
Precisely. It's holding a pose. And so the real question is, how do we tune our inner senses to perceive that aware energy?
Right, the actual how-to.
Seth provides very specific practices for this. The first is what he calls inner vibrational touch. You might think of it as a specialized kind of gaze.
How does that work in practice if I'm just standing in my yard?
So you stand and look at a simple object, a tree, for example, but instead of just looking at the surface, you allow your consciousness to expand, contain the experience of what it is to be that tree.
Okay, but how? I mean, I'm just a guy looking at bark.
Well, you aren't just observing its green leaves or its rough bark. Those are the camouflage traits. You try to feel its basic, vital sensations. You don't lose your own identity. You're still you, but you perceive the tree's reality in the same direct way you might perceive heat or cold on your own skin.
This is like a form of empathy.
It is, but infinitely more vital and direct than just like feeling sorry for someone. You are energetically merging with the object.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, and also where I think people get tripped up. It's not about visually seeing a glowing neon aura around the tree with your physical eyes, is it?
Oh.
Because we're so conditioned to think that if something is real, we have to be able to photograph it or point at it.
Exactly. And if you're waiting for physical fireworks, you will miss the inner event entirely. It's not visual in the ordinary sense. It's a felt knowing, a direct apprehension.
Felt knowing. Okay.
Another practice he outlines in The Nature of the Psyche involves tuning into what he calls the feeling tone.
The feeling tone.
Yeah, it's the practice of sitting in silence and tuning into the unique, deep musical chord of your own being. It's the emotional coloration that characterizes your reality.
Like your psychological atmosphere.
Yes. And if the inner vibrational touch is about reaching out to an object, the feeling tone is about reaching inward to the baseline frequency of yourself.
Well, that makes sense.
And you can also use this to tune into the feeling tone of a space or a situation before it physically manifests. You're sensing the energetic blueprint in Framework 2 before it hardens into an event in Framework 1.
I want to offer an analogy for the feeling tone, just to make sure we're nailing the how and not just the what's.
Yeah, please.
It makes me think of acoustic resonance. Like if you have two tuning forks in a room, and they're both tuned to the note of C, you strike one so it starts vibrating.
Right.
If you bring it close to the second one, that second tuning fork will just start humming. It vibrates at the exact same frequency, even though you never physically touched it. The sound waves move through the invisible air and connected them.
I love that.
That's how I imagine tuning into a feeling tone. You aren't physically touching the future event or the inner reality of the tree, but you're matching its frequency. You're allowing your inner senses to resonate with its chord.
That is a perfect mechanical explanation for what Seth is describing. You're calibrating your internal receiver. But there's a third practice, and this one requires a bit more unpacking. It involves noticing the gap.
The gap between thought.
Yes, but it goes much deeper than just meditating and finding a quiet space in your mind. It's about stepping out of what Jane Roberts called the official pool of consciousness. To understand this, we have to look at how we perceive time.
Okay, how so?
In her own notes, Jane described how data comes to us multidimensionally. It arrives all at once. But our physical brains can't process that, so the brain sifts this massive amount of data into what she calls time segmentation.
We need to unpack time segmentation. Like, what exactly is happening in the brain?
Think of reality as a continuous, unbroken stream of light. But your physical brain operates more like a movie projector.
Okay, projector.
Right. The brain takes the continuous light, chops it up into individual frames, and projects them one by one at a specific speed. We only perceive the illuminated frames. We completely ignore the darkness between the frames. That darkness is the gap.
So the physical world literally flashes on and off.
Right.
And we don't notice the off state.
Exactly. The practice Seth suggests is learning to jump in between those recognized pulses. You practice resting your awareness in the microseconds between physical perceptions into that gap to pick up the information of Framework 2. Seth calls this perceiving the inner order of events.
So you're slipping between frames in the movie to see the projection room itself.
That's beautifully put, yes.
But, okay, I have to push back here. And I know you listening are probably thinking the exact same thing because it's the most common hurdle.
What's that?
If I'm standing there in the park, gazing at a tree, trying to feel what it's like to be the tree, or if I'm sitting in my living room trying to feel the gap between my thoughts. How do I know it's not just my imagination playing tricks on me?
Ah.
Like, if I feel a sudden wave of warmth or a sense of treeness, aren't I just projecting my own human emotions onto bark and leaves? How is that objective data? How do I know I'm not just sitting there playing pretend?
That is the essential question, and it gets to the very core of our conditioning.
Right.
Because from childhood, we're taught a very strict dichotomy. There is objective fact, and there is imagination.
Right. Facts are real, imagination is fake.
Exactly. We're taught that what is imaginary is not true. It's a lie, a distraction. But in the nature of the psyche, Seth completely dismantles this. He states unequivocally that the imagination is the language of the psyche. It's not a hallucination generator. It is a perceptual organ.
Wait, a perceptual organ, like an eye or an ear?
Exactly like an eye or an ear. When you use your imagination, you aren't inventing a lie. You are translating non-physical data into a format your physical brain can understand.
Oh, wow.
The imagination brings you into connection with a different kind of truth. So when you use your imagination to actively feel your connection to the tree, that feeling is a direct expression of the psyche's knowledge. You aren't projecting emotion onto the tree. You're using your imagination as a translation device to read the tree's consciousness units.
So we shouldn't be dismissing the imagination. I mean, we shouldn't be trying to forcefully clear our minds of it to find some sterile objective truth. We should actually be using it as the vehicle.
It is the connective tissue between the physical individual and the non-physical entity. Now, to address your concern about just playing pretend, how do you know when it's real?
Yeah, with the dumb.
When you actually engage these inner senses, the experience doesn't feel like a daydream. It carries a quality of undeniable, striking reality. Seth, Dreams and Projections of Consciousness, notes that the inner senses have and I love this phrase, a delicious intensity that your outer senses actually lack.
Delicious intensity. That's quite a phrase.
Isn't it? It means there's no lapse of time in the perception. It's immediate. It feels more vibrant, more lucid, more solid than physical perception. It's the difference between remembering what water tastes like and taking a freezing cold gulp on a hot day. The shock of reality is unmistakable.
Okay, that makes it so much more concrete.
And ultimately, you don't have to rely on blind faith. You validate this through the physical mechanics of your life. When you engage Framework 2 directly, it's physically validated by undeniable synchronicities, a seamless flow of circumstances. The physical world bends to acknowledge the interaction.
Right. The proof is in the pudding. And to really understand this felt knowing, to believe that this isn't just an abstract thought experiment, we really need to look at someone who actually survived this shift in perception and documented it.
Yes.
We have to look at Jane Roberts herself, because the transition from theorist to practitioner is exactly what her life represents. She didn't just sit in a trance and channel Seth. Her own waking consciousness was profoundly, permanently altered by doing these exact practices.
That is such a crucial point. These weren't just lofty concepts she wrote down for other people to try. They were lived, visceral experiences. In Seth, Dreams and Projections of Consciousness, she describes these moments where she would sense the inner shape and the immense energy of a future session before Seth even spoke.
Mechanically, what does that mean? How do you sense the shape of a conversation before the words exist?
She was perceiving the organizing intelligence of the event in Framework 2 before it hit the time segmentation of Framework 1. She didn't just hear preemptive words echoing in her head. She felt a massive emotional and energetic impact.
Like a physical sensation.
Yeah, she described it as an energy that was warm, reassuring, and amazingly immediate. She felt physically upheld, supported, protected in the midst of a pervading energy that formed about and within her. She was feeling the consciousness units gathering and organizing to form the event.
She felt the inner order of the event. And this brings us back to that incredible moment in the car from 1974, which you mentioned from The Unknown Reality, Volume 2.
Yes, the car ride. She was just sitting in the passenger seat, doing nothing out of the ordinary, and her inner senses simply opened. She began perceiving the energy of the people and the town with the clarity that completely transcended physical sight.
She said she saw them as super real, didn't she?
Yes, super real. She saw that everyone passing by was vastly more than their 3D physical bodies. She perceived them as part of a glowing, multidimensional model. And the contrast was so stark that her ordinary everyday experience of the 3D world suddenly looked like a blurred, shoddy version made up of disconnected dots.
She was literally seeing through the camouflage to the vitality underneath.
Exactly.
So why does this matter to you, listening to this right now? Why are we spending so much time on Jane's experience? Because you can't just take Jane's word for it, and you can't just take Seth's word for it. You have to test it yourself.
Absolutely.
Jane's experiences mattered because they grounded her trust in the Seth teachings as a direct revelation, not an abstract philosophy. Before these experiences, she often doubted. But when you feel that delicious intensity, when you see the multidimensional grid, the doubt evaporates.
It does.
By opening your own inner senses, you shift from taking someone else's word for it to possessing your own irrefutable experiential proof. You stop being a philosopher and you become a practitioner. You gain evidence.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it changes your fundamental relationship to reality. You begin to realize, experientially, that the universe is not just happening to you. You are actively participating in its formation at a level that precedes physical matter.
Okay, hearing about Jane's experience is incredibly inspiring, but the goal of this deep dive is to get you into the driver's seat. We want you to experience that super real dimension, even if it's just a glimpse at first.
Right, you're more just nodding along.
Exactly. We don't want this to be another thing where you just go back to ordinary life. So let's pivot to the practical application. If I want to try this today, how do we actually do this without it feeling like a sterile instruction manual?
We can draw a very clear, accessible practice based directly on Seth's teachings regarding inner vibrational touch. Think of this as your Framework 2 perception practice. And it begins quite simply. You sit quietly for 10 minutes.
Just 10 minutes.
Just 10 minutes. The length of time isn't as important as the quality of the disconnection. You want to disconnect slightly from the urgent, shouting demands of Framework 1. Turn off your phone, step away from the emails. You're telling your physical senses to stand down for a moment.
Okay, step 1, stand down.
Once you are settled, you choose a simple object to gaze at, a plant in your room, a stone on your desk, or even just your own hand resting in your lap.
And this is where we have to be careful, right? Because if I just stare at my hand, my brain immediately starts cataloging it. Like, that's a hand, it has 5 fingers, the skin is dry, there's a blue vein. I'm immediately locked back into the camouflage.
Exactly. That is your time segmentation brain doing what it was trained to do, label and categorize physical threats and tools. The practice requires you to consciously shift your attention from its physical form, its boundaries, its color, its texture, to the felt sense of its sheer presence.
Dropping the labels.
Yes. You are moving your focus from the camouflage to the vitality.
I love this part, and I want to bring in an analogy that really unlocked this for me. Do you remember those Magic Eye 3D posters that were everywhere in the 90s?
Oh, yes, the stereograms.
Right, the ones that just look like a chaotic splatter of neon colors. If you stand in front of a Magic Eye poster and you strain your eyes and you stare really, really hard at the surface of the paper trying to figure out the shapes, all you will ever see is a flat, confusing 2D pattern.
You're locked onto the camouflage.
Exactly. Your physical eyes are locked. The harder you try, the more elusive the image becomes. But if you relax your eyes, if you let your physical focus blur just a little bit and soften your gaze, and literally look through the image as if you're looking at the wall behind the poster,
It pops.
suddenly, out of nowhere, this hidden, incredibly deep, three-dimensional image pops into focus. A dolphin or a spaceship, whatever. You can't force it to happen by staring harder. You have to allow the shift in perception. You have to surrender the hard focus to let the deep focus emerge.
That is an absolutely brilliant analogy because it perfectly captures the mechanics of the inner senses. The physical senses, when strained, trap you on the 2D surface of reality. They keep you locked in Framework 1. The inner senses, which require a softening of that physical grip, reveal the depth of Framework 2.
It's all about the soft focus.
So as you sit with your object, your plant or your hand, and you hold that soft, relaxed gaze, you introduce the next element. You silently ask a question. You direct your intent by asking, what is the inner reality of this form?
But I'm not looking for my brain to answer me in English, am I? Like, I'm not waiting for a voice to say, the inner reality is energy.
No, absolutely not. If you're waiting for a verbal answer, you've slipped back into Framework 1 time segmentation. You aren't asking a question to get an intellectual answer. You're directing your consciousness like a flashlight. You're tuning the acoustic resonance of your tuning fork.
Oh.
And then the final piece is simply to rest in the awareness that receives impressions. Do not force it. Just like the Magic Eye, if you try too hard, if you get frustrated that it isn't happening yet, you tense up and you lose it. You just sit and allow a subtle shift in perception to occur.
What does that shift actually feel like for someone doing this for the first time?
It varies, but it's always subtle at first, and then undeniable. You might feel a slight temperature change in the room. You might feel a sudden, unexplainable emotional knowing, like a wave of deep empathy for the plant.
Empathy for the plant.
Yeah. You might perceive a faint rhythmic pulsing that isn't visual but is felt in your chest. Or you might just experience a profound, grounding sense of peace, a feeling that the object is looking back at you with equal awareness. That is the inner vibrational touch-making contact.
So here's the challenge for you listening right now. We want you to test this. We want you to practice this Framework 2 perception for exactly 10 minutes daily this week.
10 minutes a day.
Just 10 minutes. Pick an object. Soften the gaze. Look through the camouflage. Ask the silent question. And wait for the resonance.
And as you embark on this, I strongly advise keeping a journal. But here is the critical part. Don't just write down what happens during those 10 minutes. The real validation often happens after you stand up.
In your normal day.
Yes. Pay close attention to your daily life outside of the practice. Notice any subtle sensations, any sudden intuitive insights, or shifts in how you emotionally experience reality. Most importantly, notice if synchronicities begin to increase.
Let's touch on that quickly. How do synchronicities validate this mechanically? Why would staring at a leaf make my afternoon run smoother?
Because of the interconnected nature of the consciousness units we discussed earlier. When you start deliberately engaging with the inner senses, you are consciously interacting with the creative matrix of Framework 2. You're stepping into the backstage and moving the props around.
Oh, that makes total sense.
Because Framework 1 is directly generated by Framework 2, the physical world has no choice but to respond. It's physics, not magic. Synchronicities, those perfect, seemingly impossible coincidences, are the primary mechanical validation that your inner senses are actively engaged and that the camouflage is responding to your new frequency.
It is incredibly empowering to realize that the mechanics of reality are right here, at our fingertips, waiting for us to just soften our gaze. This has been a profound exploration. We've moved from the theory of the cosmic pond to the actual mechanics of sensing the water.
Yes, we have.
We've looked at the limiting nature of our physical dashboard, the aware energy of consciousness units, the resonance of the feeling tone, and the evidence of Jane's own life.
The camouflage is indeed lifting. We're learning to jump the gap of our own neural programming, and next time, we're going to take this a step further. We'll explore projection as a way of life, how to navigate these alternative realities consciously rather than accidentally stumbling into them.
I cannot wait for that conversation. The veil is definitely thinning.
But as we close this deep dive, I want to leave you with something to consider this week as you sit for your 10 minutes. As you soften your gaze and look at that plant or that stone or your own hand, if your physical senses are just the outermost edge of your inner senses, what happens to your understanding of the universe when you realize you aren't just a passive observer trapped inside it, but the very consciousness that is actively dreaming it into form?